Hey, that was exciting too. I thought it was exciting. You got me. Wait, got it hooked up here. You got down there pretty good.
My husband found that he missed the
Testing,
end
testing.
game, and he fell asleep through the whole thing.
Can y'all hear me?
I can.
Okay. Okay, well, welcome. And we want to begin at 7 o'clock. The people who are streaming will be screaming if we don't start, okay? So let's start as we begin all things important in our lives. Not just in our own name, but always connected. And I ask you to pray with me in the name of the Father, of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Loving, gracious God, you've given us such great teachers and models of prayer, of holiness, of searching through the years, and so many wonderful people. Tonight we focus on one of your favorites, Teresa. We pray that she may be for us someone with whom we resonate, with whom we connect. We pray that my words will not get in the way of your truth and her example. And we pray this in the name and in the power of Jesus, your Son and our brother forever and ever.
Amen.
Okay. Well, once again, Father Joachim Lally, Paulist priest, retired, as you can see, which means nothing. Come in.
And I'm late and I'm...
All right. It's usually me, the late Joachim Lally, okay? So, anyway, tonight we're going into Teresa of Avila, great Carmelite reformer in the 16th century. And so I found a little 24-minute film of her life, which just kind of focuses a little bit for us the life of this great mystic. So, I think we're going to turn off the lights and get going here.
I was really a very young woman when I first fell under Teresa's spell, and frankly, I think it was the glamour of her that drew me.
She's the one who, when she entered the convent and one of her would-be suitors helped her into the carriage and a bit of her ankle showed under her skirt, she said, "Take a good look, caballero. It's the last time you're going to see it."
She's lively, she's engaged, she's funny, she's very down to earth, she's practical. She's riding in stagecoaches through the winter snows and mud in order to reform the Carmelite houses all over Spain. She manifests astonishing energy.
Teresa of Avila is one of the most colorful and beloved mystics to emerge from the medieval period. The stories of her life are legendary, and her contributions to the Carmelite order are undoubtedly foundational. But can the life and words of this 16th century saint reach across the centuries and provide meaningful insights to contemporary seekers? Though our society and culture are vastly different, our spiritual struggles are more alike than we think. Throughout her life, Teresa wrestled with such modern forces as materialism, the denigrated status of women, and most painfully, the aridity of her own spirit. In spite of these obstacles, she never abandoned her love for and obedience to God.
The important thing is not to think much, but to love much, and so do that which best stirs you to love. Perhaps we don't know what love is. I wouldn't be surprised. It doesn't consist in great delight, but in desiring strong determination to please God in everything. Teresa was born in the golden age of Spain. It was a time when they used to say that the sun never set on the Spanish Empire, because the Spanish Empire under the King and Queen Ferdinand and Isabella had become so extensive and so powerful. Religiously speaking, it was also a century in which there was an enormous blossoming of religious fervor an interest in spiritual growth and living out a very conscious, deepening love relationship with God.
On the other hand, she is in this period where it looks like the whole world is expanding, but it's also drawing in on itself. So you go from a society that's getting more and more globalized to one that wants to regiment itself differently and is once again very concerned, as the Spanish often are through their history, with orthodoxy of religion, with making sure that heretics don't mess up the social order. And Teresa is kind of caught between those two.
Though Teresa was born into a large, noble family, her father was in fact the son of a converso, a Jew who had converted to Christianity under the violent authority of the Inquisition. Juan Sanchez, her grandfather, had been whipped and forced to parade half naked around the Toledo churches. Though the family kept this history quiet, the specter of the Inquisition would continue to loom over Teresa of Avila for many years. As a child, Teresa was a passionate girl who was greatly intrigued by the lives of the saints. In one of the most endearing stories of her early life, Teresa and her brother Rodrigo set off to the country of the Moors in order to be beheaded and achieve martyrdom.
When I considered the martyrdoms the saints suffered for God, it seemed to me that the price they paid for going to heaven was very cheap, and I greatly desired to die in the same way.
Fortunately, an uncle found them before this adventure had gone very far and brought them back to safety. Teresa's mother was a sickly young woman, weakened by endless pregnancies, who would pass away when Teresa was at a very impressionable age.
I remember that when my mother died, I was 12 years of age or less. When I began to realize what I had lost, I went in distress to an image of Our Lady, and with many tears besought her to be a mother to me.
After her mother's death, Teresa was placed in an Augustinian convent school, where she began to wrestle with the idea of a religious life. Though she admired the nuns there, she herself felt no legitimate calling. At the same time, marriage, the only other option open to women at that time, was distasteful to her. After much agonizing and suffering, she resolved to enter the convent of the Incarnation.
When I left my father's house, my distress was so great that I do not think it will be greater when I die. It seemed to me as if every bone in my body were being wrenched asunder, for as I had no love of God to subdue my love for my father and kinsfolk, everything was a strain to me.
Once inside the convent walls, Teresa knew immediately that she had made the best decision and joyfully approached her new vocation. But the actual undisciplined lifestyle of an unreformed convent whittled away at her devotion and determination to seek God. Because women in that period were not believed to have the capacity for a genuine spiritual calling, little was expected of them in convent life.
Every afternoon, of course, the most charming young ladies were encouraged to come down to the parlor to entertain the townspeople. And Teresa herself was so charming and so witty and so attractive that there was actually pressure upon her to play the hostess. So there she was, getting more and more exposed to charming young men, chatting away, and feeling herself slipping and getting more and more unstable.
When I remember the way I made my profession, and the great determination and satisfaction with which I made it, I do not know how to proceed any farther with my story. I cannot speak of this without tears, and they ought to be tears of blood. And my heart ought to break, and even that would be showing no great sorrow for the offenses which I committed against thee.
Eventually, her body would register the feelings that she could not resolve. Racked by illness and guilt for the disservice she felt she was doing her Lord, Teresa retreated to her sister's farm to regain her strength.
And while she was out there, she began to read some books that her uncle had given her, including the Third Spiritual Alphabet by Francisco de Osuna, which was a beautiful kind of guide to the interior life. And she just absorbed it. You can just see that it answer this tremendous hunger and thirst that she had. It looks now as if, in fact, she says later that she actually experienced what she calls the prayer of quiet, which is one of the very first stages of real interior prayer. So she had very solid glimpses of a deeper reality. And she carried those with her on into an illness that got so acute that she was actually believed to be dead at one point.
Though barely alive, she insisted on returning to the convent, where it was 3 years before she could walk again.
After that period of being ill, which was the same time when she was introduced to the prayer of recollection and began having these beautiful experiences of the prayer of quiet, I think she assumed that that would be an ongoing experience, but very quickly it just evaporated. And that sense of consolation, of living in the presence of God, was just gone. And she says that for years and years and years she struggled in prayer. She disliked going to the chapel because it was such an arduous process to keep on praying with no felt sense of the presence of God. And she tells her readers that that period of dryness went on for 18 years.
I can testify that this is one of the most grievous kinds of life which I think can be imagined, for I had neither any joy in God nor any pleasure in the world. When I was in the midst of worldly pleasures, I was distressed by the remembrance of what I owed to God. When I was with God, I grew restless because of worldly affections.
A lot of people would have given up. But Teresa's byword, really what some people feel the essence of her character is the word determination. She said, all you need is a little bit of truly determined determination. And that seems to be what carried her through.
The fact that Teresa struggled for 18 years with her prayer life and says that she didn't receive consolation during that time, and yet continues to persist in her prayer, I think can serve as a model and encouragement for other Christians that somehow persisting through long periods of dryness, when the felt sense is that God has abandoned one, are times when the soul is undergoing a most profound growth.
One of the things that emerges when you're reading Teresa's descriptions of how you make progress in interior prayer is a beautiful sense of kind of reciprocity between one's own efforts and grace. The word grace is kind of abstract for most of it. We just sort of think of it as something good coming from someplace else. But she'll talk about how grace actually awakens within our own consciousness as we make our own efforts. And if you're doing your best, gradually you discover that something else is coming into the picture that you couldn't have anticipated, a kind of wild card. And she conveys that very beautifully, I think, particularly in the terms of the metaphor of the four waters.
In the metaphor of the four waters, one of her most enduring images, Teresa compares growth in prayer to the watering of a garden. The first stage of prayer is like drawing water from a well. Every effort we make is arduous and involves a concerted act of will. In each successive stage, there's a decreasing degree of effort required to receive God's grace. The water flows increasingly freely to the garden. The final stage of prayer is like rain coming down and saturating the earth, producing a union between the soul and the divine.
This prayer of union leaves the greatest tenderness in the soul in such a way that it would want to be consumed not from pain, but from the joyous tears. It finds itself bathed in them without having felt them, or knowing when or how it shed them. This sounds like gibberish, but that is how it happens.
After 18 years of struggle in prayer, Teresa herself had experienced a miraculous breakthrough known as her second conversion.
It happened to me that one day, entering the oratory, I saw a statue they had borrowed for a certain feast to be celebrated in this house. It represented the much-wounded Christ and was very devotional, so that beholding it, I was utterly distressed in seeing him that way, for it well represented what he suffered for us. I felt so keenly aware of how poorly I thanked him for those wounds that it seemed to me my heart broke. Beseeching him to strengthen me once and for all, that I might not offend him, I threw myself down before him with a great outpouring of tears.
So this is the period, for several years now, she will experience raptures, just these unpredictable, unaccountable moments when suddenly the beloved Christ will just come and pick her up and draw her to him. And she could be in choir, she could be in the kitchen. It happened one day when she was preparing dinner for everybody. Suddenly she's standing there with a frying pan full of eggs in her hand and she's gone,
A lot of people, I think, are more interested in the kind of spectacular manifestations of mysticism, the visions, the levitation, all this stuff, than they are in the just sort of day-to-day life of prayer that opens you up for the real unity with God. And I think Teresa is very good with separating out the unusual phenomena from the everyday work of building a relationship with God in prayer. But there's something about being faithful to it, like there is being faithful to somebody in a difficult relationship with another human being, that can then lay a groundwork of fidelity to build the real intimacy on. The keeping on is important.
As tales of Teresa's ecstasies spread through the region, she came under the suspicion of the Inquisition. As a woman, an intellectual, a mystic, and a converso, Teresa was in an extremely dangerous position. If she failed to convince the inquisitors of her Christian piety, she could have been burned at the stake.
The reason she wrote her autobiography was she wrote that under instruction, under obedience, to clarify for the inquisitors exactly what was going on between her and God, whether it was really between her and God or her and somebody else. So she knows while she's writing it that everything she says is being closely examined. She comes out with flying colors.
Many who read Teresa's autobiography are struck by her self-deprecating rhetoric. Time after time, she speaks of her wretchedness, her sinfulness, her guiltiness. The reader wonders how she can possibly have such a low opinion of herself. One explanation is that she deliberately couched her thoughts in the language of this exaggerated humility to distract the inquisitors from her true message, that women can practice mental prayer and lead a full, rich, interior life. In the Book of Foundations, she writes,
We are living in a world in which we have to think of people's opinions of us if our words are to have any effect.
When I kept coming up against the way she dealt with authorities being very obedient to the church, but also at the same time being very sure that God had chosen her to do certain things, I liked that. The combination of somebody who worked within a system and yet could do these amazing things, like reforming a whole religious order and standing the church on its ear.
Teresa continued to be a luminous presence in the convent, and increasingly the young nuns were drawn to her teachings on mental prayer. Despite her comfortable existence at the convent of the Incarnation, Teresa knew in her heart that true enclosure was the purest route to an intimate relationship with God. In the words of her friend St. John of the Cross, it makes little difference whether a bird is held by a slender thread or by a rope. The bird is bound and cannot fly until the cord that holds it is broken. She resolved to found a new, reformed Carmelite convent.
Well, Teresa, when she was founding new convents, certainly didn't always have the support of either the hierarchy or the local community. The sort of not in my backyard kind of thing was as prevalent then as it is now. I mean, she's obviously not setting up halfway houses for juvenile delinquents or something, but she's doing something as radical in respectable neighborhoods that upsets people. And the fact that she manages to pull it off and actually to get some backing from influential people and from powerful clerics is a testament to the force of her own personality and the degree of her own conviction.
The whole shape of Teresa's spiritual life and practice for the last 20 years of her life was obedience to what she felt was God's command. And she felt it was absolutely her responsibility to found new houses in each of the Spanish cities where God told her that was to be done. So this woman whose body was racked with illnesses, she had a broken shoulder that was badly set. She had a weak heart. She had terrible headaches. There was almost nothing that, no system that was sound. And yet she would take off when she heard the call. She would go off in these wretched donkey carts with wooden wheels. She would sleep in filthy inns, all over the length and breadth of Spain to set up in all 17 convents. And it was all with this sense of, well, this is what the beloved asks of me.
When Teresa was 62, she wrote what was considered her master work, The Interior Castle. In this book, she compares the soul to a castle in which there are 7 dwelling places. As one moves further inside, one discovers increasing freedom.
For the most part, there are no periods of aridity, no turmoil, no loneliness, no fear, no doubt as to the source of this tranquility. The devil cannot enter here. It is the place where God dwells, the end of our exploring.
After a lifetime of struggle, Teresa had indeed found her way into the center of the castle. But she never ceased to relate to the world around her.
Very late in the book of her life, she tells a sad and conflicted story, I think, and it's a story of a conflict that she had with one of her nuns in one of the Carmels. And she said that they were so mad at each other that she, Teresa, slammed her bedroom door and wouldn't come out all night in anger. And I can remember the first time I read that passage, I thought to myself, here is a saint who has attained the highest stages of prayer and believes in the depths of her soul that not only she but everyone else is loved. And she can still undergo a tantrum. And I thought, that is wonderful. That is such a release, because in Teresa's life we see that what God wants from us is not perfection, not even emotional perfection. That, like Teresa, we can go through all the ups and downs and fights and arguments and conflicts and still know that the foundation of our life is God and God's love.
For me, the quality about Teresa that sets her apart as a pioneer has to do with the fact that she was a woman and that she did what no woman in her time, I can't think of a woman previous to Teresa who accomplished what she did. There are historians now who are beginning to see in women like Teresa the real forerunners of feminism, in that what she was insisting upon is the fact that women have the capacity for full spiritual life, for realizing God, for achieving full union with Christ.
Though she was beautiful, charming, witty, and gregarious, Teresa never rested on her natural graces. She continually challenged herself to go deeper, to find the true nature of her soul, despite society opposition. Now, over 400 years later, women continue to face a similar dilemma, whether to play into traditional roles or to listen to that still, small voice inside and forge new territory.
What I conclude with is that we shouldn't build castles in the air. The Lord doesn't look so much at the greatness of our works as at the love with which they are done.
woman to work this, you see. Yeah, that's nice. There. Thank you. Do I use this? Thank you, Kelly. Kelly's the one responsible for getting all this fancied up for me. I send her the material and she does wonders with visual images and Google whatever it is. Images, I guess it is. Okay. So, what'd y'all think of the little 24-minute film?
Powerful.
It really gives a little insight into Teresa. In Spanish, it's Teresa, you know. And we say Teresa, but it's really Teresa. She's from Spain, Teresa de Avila. And we say Teresa of Avila, but it's just fine. It doesn't make any difference. But I like Teresa, because of what was the word they used that described her? Yes. Determination. I love a strong woman, okay? I like someone with determination, who is determined, persevering, you know? And it really took that, because she was up against quite a bit in her time to do any kind of reforming. And that's what she's noted for, to be the reformer of the Carmelite community. Even more so than John of the Cross. John of the Cross came a little bit after her. She was older than he was. They were good friends, but he was a Carmelite also, and he was not happy with the Carmelites. He was thinking of leaving and becoming a stricter order like the Carthusians or something, and she talked him out of it and said she needed him to help reform the men Carmelites. Okay? So, but she was determined, and but she had all these qualities that we'll go into in a minute here. Teresa of Avila, Doña Teresa de Ahumada y Cepeda, 1515 to 1582. A woman for all seasons, all right? So, this is a lot of what they've already covered in the film, so just read over that real quickly. The last part was not brought out, that some of her brothers were among the conquistadores in the New World, and some died there. Because, remember, she was born just 23 years after the discovery of America by Columbus in 1492. So, she was in a very interesting age. So, some of the background, some of the personalities. Martin Luther, she was just very close to the age of Martin Luther. Martin Luther started his 95 Theses, I think when she was around 25 years old. Ignatius of Loyola started the Jesuits. Henry VIII started the church in England. Michelangelo, of course, Thomas More, and John Fisher were martyred during her life in England because they refused to go along with Henry VIII in forming the Church of England. And John of the Cross, of course. So she had paradoxical qualities: introverted, extroverted, contemplative, active, idealistic, practical, firm and ever so human, feminine, but in her day known as somewhat manly due to her strong temperament and character. I know that's kind of a sexist term, you know, but in those days that was considered the highest compliment, you know, for a macho to call a woman manly. You know, it's kind of disgusting, but that's the way it is. Okay. So, who's going to read this for us? Okay, Terry.
Teresa was a single-minded woman who was determined. So often what Teresa wanted, Teresa got. She once wrote that she would not rise from her prayer until God granted what she was begging for. Mother Teresa,
Let me just explain this a little
yeah,
bit.
okay, thank you.
Mother Teresa, you know, there's three great Teresas in the church that stand out. The first would be Madre Teresa de Avila, and then Teresa of Lisieux, you know, the little flower, and then Mother Teresa, you know, of Calcutta. Those are the three ones that stand out in our minds, right? And they all had this sort of similar experience, this aridity, this dryness, you know, this time of feeling nothing, okay? I know that the little flower here, Therese, she had it in common with Teresa of Avila that they both lost their mothers at a very early age. Therese died at 27, I think it was, and of course, Teresa, I think, was 67, I think, so she lived about 50 years longer than the little flower. But there's this story of the, Mother Teresa had this great story too that I read one time, how she went into this very wealthy man and wanted some money to build some kind of a organization to help the poor, and he was saying no, and she just said, I'm going to stay here until you agree. I'm going to not leave your office until you agree. It's the same thing as St. Teresa's talking about with God, you know. She was determined, huh? Okay. And there is that story of the that you always hear about St. Teresa, how she was in the carriage and it got stuck and she got in the mud and everything, and she says to God, God, if this is the way you treat your friends, no wonder you have so few of them. Well, the person that I listened to on these tapes, who is a wonderful expert on everything Carmelite, called Teresa Teaches to Pray, by Professor Keith Egan, PhD. It's a great, it's from this Now You Know Media. Anyway, he pointed out that that is apocryphal, that there's no proof that she really said that. But it's amazing how the things associated with her, right? How many had heard that little story before? Yeah, right. Okay, so I mean, it may be true, but it's just no proof for it. Okay, go ahead.
Where would you like me to?
Similarity.
Similarity. Okay. Oh. Similarity between Saint Teresa of Avila and Saint Teresa of Lisieux. The dates there. Both entered Carmelites at a young age. Both lost their mothers while they were very young. Both very complex personalities. Both very determined women. Were they twins separated at birth, Father? I mean, such similarities, yeah.
I know, yeah.
At age 7, Teresa and her brother Rodrigo took off on their own to the land of Moors to have their heads cut off and thus become martyrs. They were soon retrieved by a relative and returned home. Teresa was an avid reader of books of chivalry and thereby learned much about storytelling.
Okay, so as a young girl, she loved to read. She got the books from her uncle, and her father didn't approve of her reading these books, so she had to read them on the sly. Okay, but it got within her this idea of chivalry, of adventure, of daring to do what no one else does, you know, and daring to listen to a different drummer. Okay. Now, when Teresa was 16, she became too close to one of her male relatives and was sent off to a boarding school in Avila by her father. All right. There, prayerful Augustinian nun Maria de Brescia mentored Teresa in prayer. And when she first there, she was very unhappy for 8 days, and then finally she started getting in touch with the whole scene, and she began to like it. She was not wanting to even think about being a nun at the time, but then, due to this influence of this Augustinian nun, she started thinking about being a sister. Now, as you know, they pointed out they had two options: being married or being a nun. they were not given education in those days. They were given studies about how to make your husband happy and how to keep a good home and how to cook and all this kind of stuff. You know. But they didn't get a lot of good, solid, what we call education. Yes, Todd.
But she could read.
But she could read, yeah,
So,
she
I mean-
did. But she was not trained in philosophy and all of this kind of stuff, you know. Okay. But her writings are not eloquent, you know. I mean, and she didn't do any editing of her writings. So the people later on had to clean up a lot of that stuff. Like Kelly has to clean up my slides. Okay. At age 20, Teresa decided to become a nun at the Carmelite monastery of the Encarnacion near Avila. Now, I was privileged to be in Avila a couple of years ago. I went to Spain with a couple of friends, a married couple, and visited Salamanca, and where she started one of her monasteries, and we took a side trip over to Avila, and it was marvelous because the background of John of the Cross and Teresa both of Avila was this walled city that like I've never seen before, completely walled city like something you'd see back in the 16th century. So hopefully I'll next time bring some photos in of those cities. Yeah.
When you went there, were those monasteries still active?
Yeah, they had some monasteries and nuns there. It's interesting that in those days they called the religious institutions for women monasteries and the ones for men convents. Yeah. I never will forget one time I was in Puerto Rico and in the old town, and I saw this convento de whatever, you know. And I thought, well, that was for sisters. They said no, this was for religious men. So that was the name in those times, convents for the men. And of course, when I was in a Benedictine monastery, it was called monastery, you know. And then the Benedictine sisters, and they were called a convent. So, you know, things change. You know. So she became a nun at the Carmelite monastery. She did this against her father's objections, but he finally consented. She became ill and had to leave the convent. She was out for a while. Her father arranged for treatment by a woman who turned out to be somewhat of a quack and who even made Teresa's condition worse. Okay, so she had her difficulties with health through the years. Bye-bye, bye-bye. Okay, now it's interesting, Teresa's grandfather was punished by the Inquisition for being a converso, a person converted from Judaism. Ferdinand and Isabella used the Inquisition, there's two Inquisitions basically. There's the medieval or the Roman Inquisition, which started in the 13th century, and the Spanish Inquisition, which started, let's see, I think around 1400 something, right? Or maybe it was 1500. I've got the dates in this other, as we go further. But they wanted to use the Inquisition to weed out all extraneous factions, like anyone that was not a Catholic. Jews, Moors, Muslims, they had to either convert or leave. And so the ones who were forced into conversion from Judaism were called conversos. And her grandfather was a converso, okay? And that was a shameful thing. If you ever really want to see something depressing, okay? You're really in a good mood, you want to be depressed. Get something from Netflix on the Inquisition. All right, I got it not long ago, and I could hardly even watch it. It was just so depressing what we did in the name of religion. Okay, so, but her grandfather, this converso, Juan, I think was his name, became quite successful in being a merchant in the mercantile world, and was able to purchase some status as a lower nobility. And so she had the title Doña. You'll see in Spain, and I've seen it in Puerto Rico and somewhat in the Dominican Republic, women who are older and sort of sophisticated and everything are called Doñas. You know, and the men are called Dons. Don Juan, you know, Don Antonio, Doña Rutilia, whatever it is. It's a sense of respect, and it used to be you had to be awarded that title, and now it's given in terms of common everyday use in terms of someone who's respected in their upper years. You wouldn't call a young woman Adonia, she would be insulted, because that was for the older ladies, you know. Okay. So she had between 11 and 12 siblings. She was a leader among this large and lively family. Teresa of Avila also was a large family, okay? Now, okay, who's going to read this for us? Okay. Oh, my God. Susan, okay, great.
Okay. Teresa was 2 years old when Martin Luther posted his 95 Theses and started the Protestant Reformation. Luther's two main theses, Bible as sole authority and faith alone, faith saves and not works. Teresa was 16 when Henry VIII became head of the church in England, and she was 32 when Henry VIII died in 1547. The Spanish Inquisition began in 1478. Teresa was born 37 years later, and it ended 556 years later in 1834.
I put that in there myself. I was born at 39, so this Spanish Inquisition only ended 105 years before I was born. It just blew my mind when they could last that long, okay? Unbelievable. Okay, go ahead.
The Index of Forbidden Books began in 1564 when Teresa was 49, and she had to deal with this index the last 18 years of her life. And the Jesuits started by St. Ignatius of Loyola in 1540 when Teresa was 25.
Okay, so what do we see here? We see this emergence of reformers in the church. Ignatius of Loyola with the Jesuits, of course, Martin Luther, considered the starter of the Reformation of the church, of the Catholic Church, Henry VIII. I mean, a lot was going on, a lot of change, a lot of turmoil. And this index, that ended in 1966, the year after I was ordained, okay? So I remember being told in the monastery that certain books were not able to be read because they were on the index of forbidden books. You remember that too, sister, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and that's great, wonderful, you know. It's like, well, you're too impressionable to read this. You cannot touch that book. That was in a special locked room, and you had to get permission from the abbot or whatever to read this stuff. All it was what you wanted to make you read it more. You know, it was the forbidden fruit, you know. It was probably boring as all get out. So, but anyway, you see the times. And it's interesting also to note that this is 500 years, you know, since Teresa, and that's basically what Thomas Keating says in his book in Open Mind, Open Heart, that the redevelopment, the rediscovery of centering prayer, of contemplative prayer, came 500 years after the Reformation. At the Reformation, the time of Martin Luther, the time of Teresa, it was a time of apologetics. It was a time of fighting for the truth. And everything in terms of contemplation and all that was put on the back burner because we had to prove that we were right. So it became much going into the control tower of the mind and not letting the heart at all, because that was suspect. That could lead you into such terrible errors as Protestantism, all right? So, I mean, it was really suppressed is what it was. And so for 500 years, until the early you can put it right there, in the early 1970s, in the Trappist Monastery of St. Joseph in Spencer, Massachusetts, in the early 1970s, that's when Abbot Thomas Keating, then the abbot, and Basil Pennington, and was the other? Pardon?
Manager?
I've been,
Manager?
manager. Yeah, William Manager. William Manager. Yeah, those three. And I took my studies of the centering prayer under mainly William Manager, but Basil was there also. Basil has since died, but Thomas Keating is in his early 90s, I think now, and Manager is probably in his early 80s. Okay, but this was a long time to be without this focus on interior life and the contemplative prayer. Because when I joined the monastery in '58, the Benedictines, didn't hear anything about learning how to do contemplation. You know, it was reciting the Divine Office in Latin, you know, starting at 5 in the morning and, you know, going till 9:15 at night, you know, off and on. And I had a hunger for prayer after all these 3 hours in church. I was reciting all these prayers, but I really didn't feel like I was in prayer. And so I would sometimes stay afterwards and pray in silence. And this was before I knew anything about centering prayer. It was just something within me that was calling me to that. And I wish I had known back in '58 what I learned in '77. Wow, it would have been a big difference in my life. But it had not happened yet, okay? Okay, now, the conflicted times in which Teresa lived. The Spanish monarchs Ferdinand and Isabella used the Spanish Inquisition to overcome the diversity of religion posed by the presence of Jews and Muslims. Okay, the medieval Inquisition started by Pope Gregory IX in 1231. Now, Teresa had a book. She's got several writings that are well known. Her book of her life is one, and the most well known is The Interior Castle. Okay, which I'm going to focus on more next time. Okay, and also the book of her life. The Inquisition took over the book of her life because they suspected it might be in error, but she was smart. She had some extra copies aside, and so it was not lost. She was a shrewd woman. I liked her. You know, she was great. Now, imagine living in a time when, if you were suspected of being in heresy, you could be burned at the stake. You could be, you know, tortured on the rack. You know, I mean, talk about living in fear. My gosh, I would never have made it, you know. I would have been killed a long time ago, you know. Okay. Inquisition became known as the Holy Office in 1908 in Rome at the Vatican. Became the Congregation for the Faith in 1965, the year I was ordained. The Index of Forbidden Books was officially abolished in '66. The significant saints who lived in time of Teresa: Peter Alcantara, Francis Borgia, Francis Xavier, Angela Merici, Philip Neri. Okay, very interesting time. Okay, so let's get into a little, any questions before we want to break up in small groups? Any comments, questions? Yeah.
I just thought it was hilarious you had a picture of Monty Python's Inquisition.
Yeah. I know that.
That's Kelly.
Yeah.
I don't know how many people would get it, but I figured I'd know.
Yeah. I think I missed it. Where was it? Where's Monty Python?
Keep going back.
Going.
Back.
There's another one.
Keep.
There it is.
There.
Oh, this is my phone. I didn't even pick that up. I'm not a Monty Python fan. Okay. All right.
So there are 3 Inquisitions.
Okay. So, if we could break up into small groups of about 6, like this is my small group here, 2, 4, 6 here, and these 6 back here, and these 5 right here, and these 6 back here. Okay, or 7. Okay. So you just want to turn your chairs around and get comfortable. These are some samples. You don't have to follow these.
I was
You
late
can
as usual.
reflect on whatever you want to.
Step
but-
right in.
what you've heard, what you've experienced. But reflecting on the above description of the times in which Teresa lived, how do you think the times today for religious sisters might be somewhat similar somewhat different. That's just one idea. What are the characteristics of Teresa of Avila that most attract you to her, and what are the reasons? So those are some just, some starters, okay? Go for it.
Well, I have to tell you, ladies, I was named after Saint Teresa.
There you go, Terry. You're Teresa, aren't you?
Yeah. Well, so I'm the leader in this group, and you're the co-leader. Are there any Dominican sisters around this table?
Yeah, that's my question too. I lived with them. I
Well, that first question, that's the social justice.
We'll get into that. 1970.
How do you think the times today for religious sisters might be somewhat similar?
girls that were from rich families
It's that determination that we will balance society.
A year ago, we were on vacation in Rome,
Oh,
and there's a very famous sculpture of Teresa.
Be careful. So that you weren't too involved in it, or you didn't really show too much interesting. I mean, you just let them, the sisters be in charge of it. And so listen to them, which was okay, because we were brand new at all this. But then, we were sent away to different universities and
Reading here with them, that's our mysticism.
to learn.
straying beyond the bounds and some supportive gay and lesbian free.
and then what take us there the way they wanted. They really dug in their heels. What happened? They was. They
Essentially, what really seemed to happen was Francis came to power and to hold Inquisition.
Did you have any success with
For a while, leadership of religious in America, leadership.
You want me to give it to
They have a
the...
national conference.
Does she have the file?
Many, maybe even before.
Well, I mean, I have it written up so she could set it
Their
up.
Archbishop somewhere on the West Coast. He was to make sure that their conferences and everything hold the line.
Well, wasn't it since the Pope Benedict was very much into the Inquisition?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so that was
Don't you go to today's? No?
And there was Pope Francis.
Or is that good? Or
I don't know. It just sort of.
Well, he felt that it was such, it was almost ridiculous because they were trying to help women.
Yes.
They say that everything person was wrong. They don't understand that we're dealing with women in very hard situations. And I think when Francis came, he wasn't so much rigid with that law.
Well, I went to a speaker today. She's Dominican. She's from the
You mean currently?
Washington, D.C. a lot. She right now lives in Minnesota. She was using the writings of Pope Francis, so you're exactly the connection is exactly right. Because he made me realize that they were social justice and poverty issues and and your mercy, he's established your mercy, and then all of a sudden, that, and they're great with their dad, because he doesn't really.
Well, he felt there were so many other issues, and that the church was dwelling too much in just that one. Not that that wasn't an important issue, but there was nothing else. It was just all this. So
He actually made a stance on that, about this when they sang at the
Well, he did. He
So,
was in the United States, and there was comments he made that
He was Williams Bishop, the one that was charged.
Do you remember when he pulled that one down out
it
of the
wasn't
crowd?
hugely blatant. I don't think he wanted to offend.
He's got a lot of
So they got nuns on the bus, remember?
Sculpture of her background.
Oh, yeah.
knowledge of St.
Well, in
Teresa.
Seattle, they
Basically said with her step.
remember when he pulled that nun from the audience when he was interviewed and said, I want you to know I love you. He was speaking to all sisters. I thought that was really what you're.
There's 400 churches in Rome.
It's in Santa Maria della Vittoria.
Off the beaten path a little bit.
They heard the Pope's Sunday message in the town. What is you should get our feelings hurt too.
Right. And all the good they were doing.
As if Jesus wasn't done there. What a forget about it all.
Well, I know that I read some of her books, and the one, it was, she was afraid that they would
You're right. I don't know how you found that out, but yes, it was, especially, there were some sisters that were gonna, we says, well, we can experiment with different kinds of habits. So then there were just varieties. Everybody, and I was sewing all kinds of habits. I was on the sewing team, and so there was where you had your head covered because that's the way, was it St. Paul? That said you should have a women wear their hair. Well, then they said, no, that's not law, that you had to have your head covered. That's how
And they were the little short ones, yeah, like the little short.
and same with the habits that we talked about, that was, those habits, those long skirts and stuff like that, they were, came from the customs of the medieval yeah. So then we looked about it and talked about it, and then it wasn't quite so scary, and then people were saying this was 18 years.
Well, right. What did she do with that? They can see your legs.
Yeah.
I love that statement that she said in the beginning. I didn't realize that that was video. Yeah. That's the last time you're going to see one of these.
No, but it was really a lot of meanness came out, division. Is the word for it.
When she had been in the convent 19
What we do today, I suppose.
With so much craziness thinking, you know, it's kind of like, wow, this could make you crazy. Yeah. I listen quite often on purpose. I know a lot of people don't, but I listen on purpose because I need to know, just how goofy it all is.
I think that we come, or maybe as in women in the church and just in life in general, have come a long way, but there still is that glass ceiling.
So after, she started both religious
Well, and the thing is not being able to do what we feel is right for society or our own lives. Not change. In fact, everybody's want to take us
16 convents.
Who has the power?
They did say that, this was just on the news the other day, companies that have women as CEOs or echelon, too much money.
Oh, yeah. I have Greece and the guy was
And that was never before, but this Michael Moore.
Oh, that last one they're raving about. I didn't see it.
Marvelous. It's called Who Shall We Be?
Oh, I should check it out. I've seen it.
And so it sounds like this, militaristic thing. That's not. It's his little play on this is all we do now as a country is invade other countries. So I'm going to go as an American male, and he's just a parent, and I'm going to visit other Western European culture, white-dominated countries, and see, I'm going to invade them and see what might we take from them, because that's what we do. We invade and we take oil, we take, you know. So he goes to European countries in particular, and he, like, for example, in Iceland, he introduced 3 female skiers. And one of their comments is that statistically, companies with females in the upper echelons do that. And he goes to Finland, where they have the best education system in the world. And it's like a documentary, really, of these good points in these other countries. And in Finland, their children and high schoolers have no homework, attend the least hours of any country in the world, and yet they are the best educated. And when he pushes the teachers, they say, well, this is American research being based in stuff.
Because she's a woman.
We don't know.
Yes. She's not any less wise than you.
Exactly. Music and arts, along with the science and the math. And without that, everything deteriorates for children. And it's very student-centered education. Because why would we want our children to grow into happy adults who know what they want and know what they're good at? And he just goes, because they might not make anything that other countries do. And he goes to Italy, where people get 8 weeks of vacation, like from day one, when you enter the
Time off for children.
5 months or something. Either parent doesn't
A nap in the afternoon before you go back to
2
work.
hours for lunch, so that everyone. And I experienced that in Switzerland, and I always laughed when I came back. What a wonderful guy. Well, she's writing. When you come to the U.S. and we're family-oriented, family values, and like, no, the countries who give families time to go home and a big healthy meal at lunch, and you're supposed to have a big healthy meal. Yeah, that sounds like family value. They value families. Well, there's a prevailing frightening thought that this is all very interesting. And that was all planned.
I don't understand what you call it.
That's a family structure, that's caring about the individuals, but you know, this is really cynical with that, the breakdown of education comes from well thought out, I've heard that, you know, as opposed to, it's not just happening, it's, you know.
I would say, because that's not,
We'll get started again.
it's not,
Okay, we can wrap it up.
it's not, you know. Yeah, but that's not, it's like,
I'm determined.
you're not,
I'm determined.
He wants
Determined to get back together.
Thank you for sharing.
You know, it's interesting that some people might call someone who's determined hard-headed or stubborn, you know. I mean, it's sort of the same characteristics, right? No? Well, there's a relation there. There's a correlation. Not exactly the same, but there. Oh, okay, persistence, determined, whatever. Okay. Anybody want to share anything that was stood out in your small groups?
Something I want to share personally that I shared with the group is that I think, I don't know if it was mentioned in what your presentation or in the movie, the dryness, the 18-year dryness.
Right.
Because sometimes, you know, I'm just not spontaneous at praying. And I mean, she's a far better person than I am, but that was like encouraging, an encouragement to me.
Sure.
You know, I'm not saying I'm going to have 18 years of, but sometimes I may just sit quietly, and one of my favorite verses is "Be still and know that I am God."
Right. From Isaiah, right.
Yeah.
I think that what I frequently say in regard to contemplative prayer and centering prayer is that it's just plain old persistence and perseverance and determination, because the people that want to have the quick fix and the microwave solution, it's not there. And so the people that, some people start out with centering prayer and contemplative prayer and silence, and after a while nothing comes, and they got one distraction after the other, and they say, oh, this is not working, I'm just going to quit this, and they give up. Well, it's like she's saying, some of the same qualities you have in making relationship work are the same thing that makes prayer something that is growth producing and is the means of developing this love relationship with God. It's this perseverance, and it's not so much what you get out of it, it's the relationship that's built. So often we judge things in terms of what am I getting out of this, all right? Am I getting peace? Am I getting tranquility and everything? If not, well, forget it. It's me, right?
But, excuse me, don't you think, Father, excuse me, interrupting you, that we may be getting something and we're not perceiving that or realizing that even though it seems like that we're not getting anything,
Right.
we are, but we're not recognizing it.
Yeah, it's just a matter of recognizing that this is a whole new way of seeing everything. That's what contemplation means. A whole new way of seeing everything, experiencing everything. And you don't go into that different mode just like you would an app. You switch apps, It takes time,
18 years.
Yeah, right. Now, I really don't know, and I want to investigate this before the next class, is what more or less were those 18 years? Did they start when she entered the convent?
Oh.
Did it go into the time after her conversion, which was 19 years after she entered the convent? She had this conversion experience. Did it, were they overlapping? I didn't find that in my readings, so I need to look into that.
Was it after her illness? When she had that illness, the 3-year illness
Well,
where she couldn't walk? And
Yeah, she had to leave the monastery for a while and came back. So, it's not pointed out. I'm going to do some research, though, okay? Yeah.
Did anybody ever mention any kind of mental, like a mental breakdown part of this? Because to me, living in that kind of a conflicted age,
Yeah.
her father's telling her, you can't get married, or whatever, he's telling her she's got to be a nun or can't be a nun, and she's a strong personality, and then she falls into this 18 years of almost like a depression to me.
Yeah.
I'm not saying she was mentally ill, but she might have been so conflicted in her own way, and with a strength like that, she got through it. She had the ability the tenacity to get through it, and then she sort of sees what she has to do, she had to go subversive. I mean, she had to do, in order to get anything done, she had to kind of work twice as hard as any other person was working.
Women in those days were not considered equal to men, and even to this day, of course. But so they had to be very subversive and kind of go around the back and in the corners, but my suspicion is, I'll just own this, is that this time of dryness was the result of her inner soul knowing that there's more, and she's not able to find the means to get there. And I think that's what drove her to this point of saying, I need to take the bull by the horns and transform this whole order. What just the nerve of it, She really had to be a strong lady, to say, as a woman, as the Carmelite, she wasn't she wasn't in charge in the sense of the whole thing, and she just took it upon herself. She said, I'm going to form my own monasteries. She formed 16 of them, all over Spain. And a lot of traveling in those awful conditions, and those awful roads, and those awful wagons, and, jeez, we complained. I was in Dominican Republic a couple of weeks ago, and we went to this one place for we're a medical clinic, and you think we got potholes here? Oh my gosh! We were just going about 5 miles an hour, just. But I mean, that's what she had to go through. They didn't have interstates, to go from Salamanca to Avila to Madrid, to Toledo.
What kind of vehicle were you in, Father?
I was just in a van of some sort.
Just let me know when you want to do it.
Okay, okay, thank
Oh.
you. Yes, Terry?
Well, to your first point there, this group of 6 talked about the modern day, what I can relate to is the Dominican sisters who
Right.
are social justice women. And, as you're talking about this saint and you ask us to compare, how are they
Right.
different, how are they the same? And then that turned into a conversation about the Inquisition, with Pope Benedict, which
Right, yeah.
turned into
Right.
support and mercy from Pope Francis, and
Right.
so there were similarities on how she lived versus how these women live. The difference is these women were allowed and are very educated today.
Exactly. yeah, right.
Almost to the point where, like this
Yeah.
woman today, I heard she's a Dominican, she has a PhD, and then the prioress of the Dominican has a law degree, MBA, and a CPA.
Right.
So, they just never stop educating themselves, so.
Right, yeah. Oh, I know, and still they can't be ordained. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
These ladies, religious orders would have a male priest
Yeah,
that was over them. They were like the
Of course.
spiritual. Did she?
yeah,
Oh, they did too?
of course, yes.
Oh,
And he's the one that supported her in going with and starting these monasteries. Okay, he kind of gave her permission.
was that John of the Cross?
No, it was another
Carmelite?
Carmelite priest, yeah,
So
like
what
the
did
superior of the area.
What didn't she like about the convent? Just the prayer life?
Well, it was like she said, it was not structured. They would go down and go to the parlor and entertain people in town, and it was not really like what we know as a monastery or a convent. Very little emphasis on prayer, and it was just like get thee to a convent, of Shakespeare,
It's more like a social organization
Yeah.
for rich young girls that didn't want to get married.
That's right. Right.
Sorority.
The sorority, whatever, It was a different world, and so she saw that vision and she followed it. And she got John of the Cross with her, and he started the reform of the Carmelite men. So, I'm really impressed with her determination. Yes.
I do want to put a plug in though for Hildegard von Bingen in the 900s. Was in the video it said she was the first of the rebellious, but no, Hildegard von Bingen was
That's a
actually
good point.
first.
That's a good point, yeah.
In the 900s.
In the 900s, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, a Benedictine.
I got one of her tapes, so.
I'm considering next year which the mystics I want to really focus on, and Hildegard is one of them, and John of the Cross, and I'm thinking of others, so maybe Bechtel of was it Bechtel, is it?
Yeah, Mechtel.
Hildegard and Bechtel, what is it?
No, Mechtel was
I
before
forgot the
or
name.
after or during. I don't know
Anyway.
the dates, but I know her name is Mechtel.
I remember that name. That's all I remember. Okay.
That's all I can come up with.
Okay. Well, let's continue. Anybody else have any comments or questions?
So, would you just clear up your definition of mystic, because the modern day definition has not yet shown up.
Okay, I like Rohr's definition of
Okay.
mysticism, which is anything that goes beyond, let's see. Mysticism is that which goes, mysticism is anything that goes beyond dogma, morals, and liturgy or ritualism. And this pretty well makes up people's concept of religion these days. Dogma, teachings, morals, is it right, is it sinful, and ritualism, how do you perform your liturgies? Is it right? Are you doing it right? You're doing it according to the germ, GERM, the book that says exactly how everything's to be done. Okay, and so mystics go beyond this. These are the fingers pointing to the moon, all right? But they're not an end in themselves. See, we've sort of made it, okay, if you're right dogmatically, and you're right morally, and you're right ritually, wow, you are right. This is the end. There's nothing further. This is it. And mystics are saying, hey, these are just fingers pointing to the moon. They're not the moon. It's much more than that. And what is the more? It's this love relationship with God, with others, with ourselves, with the cosmos. In these 4 relationships. And they're getting more and more emphasis now on the relationship with the cosmos, with such wonderful writers as Ilya Delio and people like that, Teilhard de Chardin. You know, so, but do you understand the beyond business? It's not saying these are wrong, they're just saying they're not enough. That's just another way to say mysticism. It works for me anyway. Yeah.
So you could have a non-Christian mystic based on
Of
that
course,
definition.
of course. Yes. Right. Okay. Okay. Art and literature in Spanish culture. Teresa lived in a time of creative art and literature. El Greco's paintings at that time, portrait of John of the Cross, Miguel Cervantes' Don Quixote, was published within 2 decades of her death in 1852. And it says, Teresa was no wordsmith, but had a knack for imaginative and colorful, down-to-earth images. She became the storyteller of God's work in the Carmelite reform, while John of the Cross became the poet and the theologian of this reform. But John of the Cross was not the theologian of Thomas Aquinas and Bonaventure and so forth. But in comparison with Teresa, he was much more a theologian. He was trained. He had studies. I mean, Teresa wasn't allowed any. I mean, she just got what she could. And a lot of it just through her prayer life, you know. It's just an example of the discrimination against women and how she was able to overcome it basically through a deep prayer and mystic life. Don Quixote, the Man of La Mancha. There's an El Greco painting. Where'd it go there, Kelly? Look, there you go. You'll notice El Greco's paintings have always this slender face. If you've ever seen El Greco, all of his figures have these very slender, narrow face. You can always tell that El Greco.
The colors are always almost fluorescent.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is very odd for that period of time.
Yes. I wish I could remember the real name. The El Greco is his nickname, but it's a Greek name. Anybody remember what it is?
Pan something, isn't it?
It is something. I think it was Penanopolis or something like that. I don't know. But anyway, it's not that important. Okay. Who wants to read this farce here? Okay, Jen.
The conversion of Saint Teresa of Avila. After 19 years in her Carmelite monastery, Teresa, is it Teresa? Am I saying that right?
Teresa or Teresa, whatever
Okay.
you like it.
Teresa underwent a life-changing conversion at age 39 that affected the way she lived and the way she prayed for the rest of her life. Before this conversion, she admitted that she was tired and weary.
Okay.
That's big. Her monastery of the Encarnacion was very large. Perhaps 150 nuns were the well-off, and the poor had separate and unequal accommodations, and where among so many it was difficult to find solitude for prayer.
Just stop. Can you imagine convents determining who was nobility and who was not?
Yeah.
And they would get their accommodations differently? Yeah.
So, and didn't the wealthier ones actually pay for their kind of
Like
a dowry? Likely they did.
Yeah, they
You want a first class suite, you pay for it, right? A first class ticket on the plane, right? Somebody's got to pay for it, right? That's a good point, yeah. Okay, go ahead, yeah.
Teresa writes in the book of her life, I wanted to live, for I well understood that I was not living, but was struggling with a shadow of death. But I had no one to give me life, and I was unable to catch hold of it. He who had the power to give it life, to me, was right in not helping me, for so often had he brought me back to himself.
Okay, now this is an example of Teresa's writing. Not easy to read, okay? You have to read it 2 or 3 times, you know? The same thing with Meister Eckhart. You just don't read that, you know, easily. It's a different age, a different... Eckhart lived in the 1300s, and she lived in the 1500s. But, and same thing with Julian of Norwich. I mean, if you want to read the mystics, you need to struggle, because they're not like reading Richard Rohr or Joan Chittister or something, you know, today, which is very clear thinking and, you know. Yes, Raul.
Does she mean there he brings me back to himself? That she was suffering, and then because she was suffering, she went back to her. She felt the need to go back to God.
Well, her whole theme in life was searching for God, okay? And this restlessness that saying, I guess, she was a great fan of Augustine. And remember his famous saying, our hearts are restless and they will remain restless until they rest in God. And so this was this restless searching. And so this is reflected in here, that I had no one to give me life. He who had the power to give it to me was right in not helping me for so often, and he brought me back to himself. What do you think she meant by that? That's a powerful statement if you really get into it. Especially that part, he was right in not helping me. What is she saying?
She needed to do it herself.
Just directing her back.
Okay.
Trying to find it herself. I mean, she, up here, she said something about he or what, I wanted to live, but was struggling with shadow and death, but I had no one to give me life. She was, you know, we're always raised as women that somebody else gives you your happiness, somebody
Right.
else you live through, blah, blah, blah. We were just sidebarring at 39, she was just going through, you know, just a female change and struggling, just like many women at 39, 49, 59 do today.
Exactly. Okay.
But then returning back to her, she might have had a life crisis of her own, and that sometimes forces you back to your center of God, or center of religion, spirituality.
I'm not saying I have the answer. I'm struggling with this just like you are, because
The simple thing is she's humble. She's saying, you know, I don't deserve to be brought back, but he kept bringing me back so often.
yeah,
She's the
yeah.
humility. I wondered about many of the people who have these life experiences have a warm feeling that go over them, and now they feel close to God. Did she have that warm feeling?
Oh, she did, to the end of her life. You get into
Did she
the
describe
interior
it?
castle, you know, the various rooms that she has in the castle. Get into the 6th and 7th room of the interior castle.
Okay.
It's about warmth and love and intimacy, and it's powerful. We're going to get into that next time when we get into the interior castle. Joshua, you had something?
Yeah, I was just going to expound upon a little bit what he was saying. I think that she was not only humbled, but viewed the interim as necessary. As though through her famine she was learning, and that it was necessary that she went through that process.
That's a good point, you know, that this part of the growth process, right?
Right, like being brought away to be able to appreciate the light, and also to be able to endure darker times. That way she can shine brighter for other people's darkness. She can have empathy towards it better.
Exactly. I mean, it's like Mother Teresa, right? The same thing, yeah.
I was just gonna say, I think it's helpful to be reminded when God doesn't, in quotes, help us, how much we do depend on God. It means, I mean, we can go, especially if you've had a really religious experience, you can coast on that, and after a while, you can start to say, this is great, I'm doing good, and then
Let's build 3 tents.
you know, right, you know, how good it is for us to be here, and they didn't know what they were saying, you know, and so sometimes God says, oh, okay, slow down a little bit, pumpkin. He pulls, you know, he'll, you know, sometimes he carries us, and sometimes he sets us down.
Yeah.
And it's good to remember that he's always next to us, but that it's him that gives us life.
Exactly. It's that relationship, that intimacy. Okay? These are good points, really great points, yeah. Yes, Patty.
Sometimes I think he lets us go on her statement here was right in not helping me. Lets us go on long enough till we've reached a point where when it does occur, we know it's him reaching out to us and not us reaching to him.
Yeah. And
It's
that
not our
brings
achievement.
that brings in this whole concept of our effort and God's effort in this love relationship, okay? And so Rohr points out the difference between willfulness and willingness. That's a big theme of his. What do you think that means? Willfulness and willingness.
Stubbornness and surrender.
Well, that's okay. That's a good way to put it.
Sometimes it can be, I have this great idea that I'm sure God's gonna like, so doggone it, I'm gonna do it. And God will help me.
Yeah, right.
As opposed
I'll get him
to-
to agree with, right.
As
Okay.
opposed to, more Ignatius, there are multiple goods, and which one would you call me to, Lord?
Yeah.
And so allowing God, if you will, to direct, as opposed, as much as we can discern.
Right.
As opposed to, well, I'm pretty darn sure that God would want me to build this church, or build this
Right.
barn, or
Exactly.
follow this path,
Well-
because it's what I think is great.
Well, it's just like Francis of Assisi.
Yeah.
I mean, when he thought God wanted him, when he said, rebuild my church, he went out and started putting stones on his old abandoned church. And, God was talking about the whole church, So it's like this back and forth struggle, huh? Relationship. Any relationship's like that, But these are good comments. Wow, great stuff. But, the first, this Egan here points out in his, all these CDs, is a 5 CD set on Teresa. He's got, this one is on Teach Us to Pray. He has another one that is more on the interior castle, which I'm going to order and have it listened to by next time. But he says the first 3 rooms of the interior castle are all about your own effort, what you can do to make your contemplative life work. Then the last 4 rooms are more God doing, okay? Letting go, surrendering, letting go. That's, Rohr says that all of spiritual life can be summed up in those 2 words, letting go. Just letting go, letting God be God, And so often we want to call the shots, we want to be in control, we want to say what we need, what's the best, and some people would say, well, that's just ego, but it's ego in the definition, in the sense of Rohr, which is not so much self-esteem, which is good. Ego in the sense of mysticism is that independent self that thinks they can do it all on their own. The self-made, I won't mention the politician's name that's, kind of well known for that. But, that sense that, I did it my way, and Frank Sinatra, I did it my way, And one of the commentaries on here referred to Teresa as a self-made woman. I thought, oh my gosh, you don't know what you're talking about, No one is self-made. It's this relationship back and forth, struggle and give and take and surrender and struggle. But it's wonderful. It's great. That's what life is, right? Una lucha, as they say in Spanish. That's in Spanish. Tú sabes eso, ¿verdad?
Sí, luchas.
La lucha. A lot of times you'll say, ¿Cómo estamos? How you doing? And they will respond. They won't just say fine like we do. How are you? Oh, I'm doing fine. You could be ready to turn on the gas, but you say, well, I'm fine. How are you? No, it's true. I mean, a lot of people do. But with so many of the Hispanics, they're much more honest. They will say, ¿Cómo tú estás? And they'll say, luchando. I'm in the struggle. Okay? Or they'll say, ¿Cómo si, cómo sa? I'm just so-so. I mean, I see, right? And so you know where they stand because they're not just going to tell you what is the customary I'm fine, how are you, And Teresa was Hispanic. She was from Spain. And she tended to say it like it was. But, one of the interesting things that we take in consideration is that she's writing all of these self-deprecating remarks in her books. Very like I'm nobody, I don't know anything. And Anna looks like she really has no self-esteem. But just like they said in the film, she's trying to, keep one step ahead of the inquisitors. Because women were not supposed to be intelligent and, yeah, so.
And I heard them say that, but I kind of disagree with that, because I think she realized, as humans, she realized who she was as a human, that she was a sinner, that she did have weakness. Yeah. But that didn't affect her self-esteem. That's just it's just the facts. It didn't affect that she knew she was loved by God. Mm-hmm. And that, that I can say I'm a worm and still know that God loves me.
Okay.
And that I'm still, in his eyes, wonderful and beautiful and special and all that kind of stuff. But there is still my human condition, but that doesn't affect my self-esteem. And I think the same was with her. And because right. I think the last thing, wasn't her last words, like, as she died, was, "Have mercy on me, a poor, poor sinner." Yeah. And it was like...
See, this is one of those unanswered questions about Teresa, because we can't, right. What do you really mean, But there are those that say she was trying to ward off the inquisitors by these statements, and others, like yourself, that are saying, no, she's just saying things like like they are. She's being honest. She's being, So there is this ongoing question. We don't have to solve it, but it is interesting, the dynamics. But we do know the Inquisition was there.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
In some ways, some of that language has some parallels to what Luther was doing.
Yeah.
Because he went into a monastery to find God and was not finding it.
Right.
He was just finding himself to be very inadequate and undeserving and now I think I guess he's probably not in the mystic category. He's more of a theologian. His conversion was more intellectual.
Some people that want to put him in the mystic category.
Oh, do they?
Yes.
I don't know, but I mean, he wrote a lot about that too. About how I'm just not worthy. I'm nobody, and this was a major crisis for him, which ultimately led him to his revelation.
The whole thing of faith and works, right? Yeah, that's a good point.
Isn't our century or our culture's concept of self-esteem and all of that is far different than what theirs was also?
Well, yeah, I mean, they didn't have Freud and Jung and Adler and all of these people at those times, They didn't have the psychological tools to work with. And so it's hard to kind of put them back in our, we're struggling. It's a good struggle. A good point. You guys are raising great points, I tell you. It's wonderful. Okay. All right. Who's going to read this now? Okay, Annika.
Conversion continued. Teresa's book of her life is more about God's action in her life than about her own actions. She is careful to share with us how God changed her life at 39. She writes that she had often been more anxious that the hour I determined to spend in prayer be over than I was to remain there, and more anxious to listen for the striking of the clock than to attend to other good things. One day, on entering the monastery's oratory, Teresa was struck by a statue of the wounded Christ. My heart broke, and I threw myself down before him with the greatest outpouring of tears. Teresa was very much affected by the writings of St. Augustine and the life of Mary Magdalene.
Right. And I might point out that in those days, they were still under the fallacy of thinking Mary Magdalene was the great prostitute. And they have, scripture scholars have come out and said that that is absolutely wrong. She was not the prostitute that's mentioned in the scriptures, and she's gotten a bad rap. You know, big bad rap for many years, you know. So she was, and I was reading where she was probably, they've just discovered some ruins in Israel around the, and discovered a temple in the area of Magdala. That's where she gets her name, Mary of Magdala, you know, like Jesus of Nazareth, Mary of Magdala. That was Magdala was the town she was from. But it showed that she was very likely a very wealthy woman who was one of the women who provided for the apostles, you know. But somehow or other people interspersed her name among the account of the woman who came in with her tears and you know, wiped the feet of Jesus and all that. But it doesn't say that, you know, so we got to be so careful how we put things in like that. And of course, I think St. Thomas got a bad rap too with about doubting Thomas, but anyway, we won't go into that. Okay. All right, who's going to do this one now? Yeah, okay, Tony.
During the last 3 decades of her life, Teresa showed how one can be contemplative, a mystic, and yet be a busy administrator, foundress of new monasteries for women, 17 of them. Although not her best male friend, John of the Cross and Teresa were very close and influenced each other considerably. At one point, John of the Cross told Teresa he was thinking of leaving the Carmelites and joining a stricter order like the Carthusians. But due to the influence of Teresa, he stayed in the Carmelites and became the primary one who reformed the Carmelite friars.
Okay. I'm really looking forward to going into John of the Cross. Beautiful, beautiful writings. And, hopefully next year we'll be able to do that, starting in September. You know, the next series. Anybody interested in continuing with the mystics? All right, yay, good. Okay. Okay. Well, looky here, the curtain. All right. That we're saying it's curtains. Is that what you're saying? All right. Okay. Yeah, we want to just show you a few. We have about 14 little photos that I took on my mission in Benefit Public. I got back March 17th, St. Patrick's Day. I was there 2 weeks, and it was my 45th mission as far as I can remember. I lost track, but it's for over 26 years. And so we're focusing on the construction. We built 19 houses. One of them, one more, which was in addition to another house. And the other houses we tore down were absolute misery. Dirt floors, rotten wood, leaky roofs. And this is one of the ones that we replaced it with. This was right after painting this, what we call the butterscotch house. This was a kind of a butterscotch color. That was the only paint they had at the time. You know. Just lost our picture.
I'm trying to get it to go into a slideshow.
Go into what? Slideshow. Oh, I slowed you. Okay.
But it's not.
Well, can I just flip it with this? I can't.
No, it won't let you. It's at the
Not
bottom.
gonna
She's all
work.
the way at the bottom.
It's at the bottom.
Yeah. I
Is
think
at the
that's-
bottom?
Yeah, under that bar.
I keep
Oh,
swiveling it.
under the thing here. Okay, that's why. Ew.
Yeah.
I don't know how to get rid of it though.
Can't you see it on the screen?
There it is.
Because.
But I want it to be big.
Can you just hit this one here? You hit this and make it go? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I just can't.
Well, this is what they were before. This is an example. This is another one. This little guy, this man here, I went into his house. He's got a little sewing machine there, and that's how he makes his living. But it's so pitiful. He had a little piece of plastic over his bed to keep the rainwater from coming down on his bed. So we're going to hopefully build him a house. Okay. This is one of the homes we built. They only have about 20 by 20 plot of land, and so we tear down the home. Usually it's a dirt floor, so we have to dig the foundation, put cement down. They mix the cement on the ground. They have no cement mixers, okay, all by hand. And then you fill in that, wait till it dries, and you put your blocks up about 5 blocks, and then put your wood up. And then put a tin roof on. This is a fellow, what was it, Enrique, I think was his name. Oh, this is John Teeples. He is a lawyer in Jenison. Yeah. And this is his first time down there. And he was teaching the little fellas how to saw and how to measure and how to cut wood and everything. It was great. This is the house we built about 5 years ago. We never painted, so now we're painting it. It's desperately in need of paint. The door is not quite straight, but you know. That's probably because it's situated on land that is marshland. It was in the barrio called La Cienega, which is the Latin Spanish word for marshland. It's soft. You'd sink down. You'd think it almost like you're going into quicksand, you know. And I used to walk there, and I hesitate to walk on there because it would sink down so much. But that's what the foundations were on, and so we had to build them especially strong to avoid the shifting. This one we decided on tearing down the day before we were going to finish. I talked to the owner, Elvis is his name, and yeah. And I said, you know, because around him we were building other homes. I said, I'm so sorry we didn't get to build your home, but next year we will. And I mentioned this to the priest that took my place in charge of the mission down there because I wanted to let a Dominican Republic person be in charge, not this gringo. So I gave up that position about 5 years ago. And so I mentioned it to Father Nelson, who just got his doctorate in canon law, by the way, in Salamanca, which is right next to Avila. Okay. Anyway, he said, how will you be next year? Within 2 minutes, he had given orders to tear that down. And so they were tearing it down before we could even discuss it. But anyway, it's now person's got a new house.
Are the floors, do they continue to be dirt then?
No, we put cement on the floors.
Oh, and all, not just the foundation?
Oh, everything's got cement.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. This one has not got the cement yet. This is Jasmine and her 3 children. She's 19. She has children 5, 3, and 2. And her husband was killed 8 months ago in a motorcycle wreck. So she's a widow at 19 with 3 children. Now she has a new house. She was living with her parents before, okay? Curtains. We were talking about curtains before, right? Janet Ogden, who came down with us from Grand Rapids, she brought material down and she started sewing curtains. We've never done that before. This was the first. So this is the curtains we had. This is a young woman from Arkansas who's painting there. Comes from a very wealthy family down there that has 17 car dealerships. She's a millionaire, okay. She loves it. There's our butterscotch house again, okay. It's now got this stuccoed and painted probably blue, okay. That's what either blue or green. There we go, that's it. That's all the ones I have, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so anyway. Okay. I wanted to take a few minutes to have you look at the quotations there of Avila, and I would like kind of as an assignment for next time, I would hope that you would use those for meditation, reflection, and pick out those ones that really resonate with you, that just, you know, reverberate, whatever you want to call it. There's some powerful, some of them are well known. You recognize some of them. Anybody see any ones that you recognize right away?
God alone suffices.
Let nothing disturb thee. That's another one. That's very much like Julian of Norwich, you know.
This one, Christ has no body now, but you're
Right. That's a very well-known one. One of my favorites is the feeling remains that God is on the journey too. You know, this whole idea of God is evolving as we are. Okay. Some theologians don't care for that, okay? They want God to be, static and everything. The third page, I like the mental prayer, in my opinion, is nothing else than an intimate sharing between friends. It means taking time frequently to be alone with Him whom we know loves us. It's a very nice definition of contemplative prayer. And the last page, one of my favorites, is to reach something good, it is very useful to have gone astray and thus acquire experience. Wow! Who does that sound like? Who was the other mystic we had this year that talked in those same lines? This is for bonus points. It was Julian Horwitz. Yeah, remember she said, first is the fall, next is the rising up from the fall, and both are the grace of God. Okay? So it's this whole understanding of where sin falls into place, and you know. So anybody see anything else there that strikes them that you like, that you just look at quickly?
I like this pain is never permanent.
Right, yeah, I like that too. It's like the saying, "This too shall pass." You know, that's the meditation of those who have kidney stones. You know. Go ahead.
And I like this one. I think it shows their humor that one must not think a person who is suffering is not praying. He is offering up his sufferings to God, and many a time he is praying much more truly than one who goes away by himself and meditates his head off.
Right.
And he has squeezed out a few tears, thinks that is prayer.
I like that. That is real Teresa of Avila. I mean, speaking as it is. She is not the mystic and the halo and all that. She's saying it like it is.
What about
I love it.
what a great favor God does to those he places in the company of good people?
Uh-huh. I like that one too, yeah.
I like truth suffers but never dies.
Yeah, that's pretty relevant
Okay.
today.
Yes. Good stuff, huh? Looks like this was written 500 years ago.
That's interesting.
It's still relevant. It's still earth-shattering in a lot of ways, you know. So, just a couple of minutes for questions or comments.
I have a question about the movie. To go
Yes.
back to the movie, may I ask? And the woman that said she was a priest, she had the collar, and then at the end, is that, it said Saint, was that a different denomination that she's a
Probably
priest in?
Episcopalian.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not being, you know.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying that's my
Not to be negative, I
As
just.
far as I know, there are no recognized female Catholic priests.
No.
Not yet.
Well, no, I didn't mean to imply that, because I did want to be a priest when I was younger, but now that I'm older, I couldn't do what you men do.
Yeah, right.
So,
Okay. Anybody else? Yeah, Tom.
Yeah, many mentions to this order that she was in, Carmelite,
Yeah.
and that John of the Cross was also a part of that. For those of us who absolutely no idea what that means.
Okay, it's an interesting question. Okay. I asked a question about the Carmelite order, okay? The Carmelites, a lot of them like to say they're older than the Benedictines. And of course, I was a Benedictine, and started in the 543 in Nursia in Italy. But the Carmelites say they go back to Elijah.
oh,
And Elijah was on this Mount Carmel in the Holy Land, and there were some hermits there and so forth. There's no direct connection, but they like to make that, you know. But I'm not sure, but somebody might Google it. But I think the Carmelites probably started 1300s. They don't really have a founder as such, like Francis of Assisi or Dominic. There's no one that stands out as the founder of the Carmelites that I could remember. I could be wrong with that, but I don't. I'm sure they recognize someone, but no one that's canonized as saint. You know, like Paulus, we are trying to get our founder canonized, Isaac Hecker. You know, so every community wants their own founder or foundress canonized. You know, so.
Father, excuse me, isn't there a title for Mary that's Our Lady of Mount Carmel?
Yeah, it goes back to the Mount Carmel of the
Old Testament.
Elijah's, you know.
Oh, okay.
But they were known for their austerity. I remember stories of the Carmelites building their own caskets and sleeping in them at night.
Oh my.
Use discretion. Right there.
You can sign up right here, you know.
I knew a priest that did that. And he used it as a bookcase.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah, right. I mean, you can do that. I've seen the advertisement. You buy your wooden casket, and then but you can use it as a bookcase until you need it.
I think he was cremated.
Oh.
Oh, is that right? Okay, well, he had a lot of room, you know. Unless he took his books with him, you know.
That's why he was
Father Kubiak was the one that, in Manistee, that's where I'm from, he passed out potatoes for Halloween because, you know, it was a good thing. It was a healthy thing. And they were all over the sidewalk. Very practical.
We're talking about St. Teresa, but can you answer why St. John is called St. John of the Cross?
Well, we're going to go into that when we take
Is that
John of the Cross.
too complicated to answer?
Well, that was just the name he took in religious life.
Oh, that's the name he took. Okay,
Yeah, right,
thank you.
right.
Thank you.
Yeah, so he wasn't Little John of the Cross when he was growing up, no. I'm sorry?
He considered a mystic.
He reportedly had the stigmata, and so people would put him into that category of mystics.
I don't think there was.
It's a good question. I don't know if there's any book of mystics that you either are in or out.
Are you going to tell us a joke before we leave?
Oh my! Well, I did hear one. Let's see. I don't know if I told you this one about the woman who she's about 75 and she's in a nursing home and she tells her women friends there that she's going to get married. Did I tell you that one?
I don't.
And so she says, "Well, I'm going to get married," and her friend says, "At your age? Why?" And someone said, "Is he really rich?" He said, "Well, no, not really." "Is he really good looking?" She said, "Well, not particularly, no." "Well, then why are you getting married?" And she looked at him, she says, "Because he can drive at night."
You up that to 85 or 95. Those of us that are nearing 75.
Okay, the next version of that joke will be revived.
85 or 95.
Okay. Let's just have a prayer, huh? Conclude. Let's lay hold to the silence which invites us into your castle, in which we truly discover who we are. Strong and gentle God, we give you thanks for Teresa, for her determined spirit, for her perseverance, for her struggling to know you, to share you. We pray that we may let her spirit permeate our spirit, so that we can have the same hunger that she had for seeking after you, for finding you, for being in a love relationship with you. Help us like her to never give up and to believe that you are with us at this very moment, now and forever and ever.
Amen.
Amen. May God bless us all with a peaceful night and a safe
Thank you,
journey
Father.
home. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you all for coming. I enjoyed being with you. Thank you. Bye.